Michael B. Jordan had always been a fan favorite, an actor known not just for his range and charisma on screen, but also for his discipline, integrity, and calm composure off-screen. But no one expected what happened that night on Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show, least of all the studio audience who arrived expecting jokes, laughter, and maybe a sneak peek of his next blockbuster. The evening began with energy, applause echoing through the rafters as the house band welcomed Jimmy to the stage with their usual upbeat rhythm, and when Michael walked out, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, fans screamed and clapped as though they'd been waiting their entire lives to see him live. Jimmy greeted him with his signature smirk and a handshake, but something in Michael's eyes suggested he wasn't in the mood for playful banter, and as the interview started, what was supposed to be lighthearted quickly turned sour, beginning with a clip from Michael's latest film being met with a backhanded comment from Jimmy about the character's emotional range being predictable, to which Michael raised an eyebrow and simply said, "You sure you watched the whole thing, bro?" A ripple of nervous laughter trickled through the audience, but Jimmy, clearly feeling like he had to assert control, chuckled and quipped, "I mean, it's no Fruitvale Station," referencing one of Michael's earlier career-defining roles, which might have landed as a compliment if not for the tone, half condescending and dismissive, and that's when Michael shifted in his chair, sitting upright, his demeanor cooling, and though his smile remained polite, there was steel behind it, and he replied, "Funny, I don't remember you ever making a movie anyone cared about," which pulled an audible gasp from the audience as Jimmy tried to recover, laughing awkwardly and reaching for his mug, but Michael wasn't finished, and neither, it seemed, was the tension. Jimmy pushed forward, trying to lighten the mood by bringing up an old interview Michael did back in 2015 where he'd allegedly made comments about dating preferences that tabloids had twisted into controversy. Michael immediately knew where this was going and cut in before Jimmy could finish the sentence, his voice calm but firm. "We're really bringing that up in 2025, after everything I've done since. You want to focus on 10-year-old tabloid drama." The crowd quieted, sensing the shift from awkward to uncomfortable, and Jimmy, perhaps realizing the weight of his mistake, backpedaled and tried to redirect to a prepared comedic skit involving a mock boxing match, but Michael waved it off, saying, "Nah, I'm not here to be part of your late-night circus, man," and the silence that followed was thick, only broken by a few coughs and the hum of studio lighting. At that point, Jimmy leaned in slightly, possibly hoping to salvage the segment with sincerity, and asked, "Are we good?" But Michael, looking directly at him, responded, "You're good at poking people for laughs. Maybe try asking something real for once," and with that, he stood up, adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, and without looking back, walked off stage, past the stunned band, past the wide-eyed production crew, and through the curtain, leaving Jimmy frozen in his seat, blinking as if unsure whether what had just happened was real. The audience erupted, not in applause or laughter, but in murmurs and murmured disbelief, some even standing as if to follow him with their eyes, and Jimmy, to his credit, tried to joke it off, saying, "Well, that's one way to end an interview," but no one was laughing, and moments later, the network cut to commercial, but social media didn't wait. Within minutes, the moment was trending across every platform, clips of Michael's final words replayed with captions like, "Legend, Real One," and "Enough is enough," while others debated whether Jimmy had crossed a line, whether late-night TV had become more about mockery than conversation, and while PR teams scrambled and hashtags exploded, Michael was already in his car, quietly checking his phone, declining calls, and texting his publicist that there'd be no more talk shows for a while. In the days that followed, fans and celebrities alike rallied around him, praising his poise and backbone, while Jimmy issued a generic apology during his monologue the next night, claiming things had been misinterpreted and that he respected Michael tremendously, but many viewers weren't convinced, having watched too many moments like this play out with too few consequences, and Michael, meanwhile, went on to release a video message, not to apologize, not to explain, but simply to thank people for their support and to remind them, you don't have to laugh to be liked, you just have to stand for something, which only added to his legend. And though producers from other shows began quietly reaching out with interview offers, promising dignity and respect, he declined every one, instead focusing on directing his next film and launching an initiative supporting young black filmmakers who, like him, had too often been underestimated or oversimplified in the public eye. As for Jimmy, the fallout left a mark, not the kind that cancels a career, but the kind that stains a reputation, lingering like an invisible crack in the foundation of a well-lit studio where the laughs once came easy, but now came just a little slower, a little more self-conscious, and though both men moved forward, their paths didn't cross again, not publicly, and perhaps not privately either, but the moment remained. a flashpoint in entertainment history where the facade slipped, the masks fell, and one man chose dignity over entertainment, truth over appeasement, and walked off not in defeat, but in control. 2 weeks had passed since the explosive moment when Michael B. Jordan left Jimmy Kimmel's set mid-interview, and the fallout had only intensified, not calmed, as public opinion remained sharply divided, with some defending Kimmel's questions as part of late-night tradition while others insisted that the host's tone and choice of topics exposed a deeper disregard for respect and context when it came to interviewing accomplished black artists like Michael. And even though Michael himself had largely avoided further comment, the storm around him continued to build, dragging in past clips from other interviews, think pieces dissecting systemic issues in media framing, and endless social media discourse over what had become a viral flashpoint in entertainment and culture. And despite efforts by Kimmel's team to downplay the incident and move on with business as usual, the ratings told a different story. Each show since had seen a subtle decline, nothing catastrophic, but enough that network execs were paying attention, enough that publicists were quietly advising their high-profile clients to perhaps reconsider the show for upcoming press tours, and enough that Jimmy himself, once the cool-headed face of sarcastic late-night charm, now carried a visible tension in his posture, his delivery a little too forced, his laughs slightly delayed, and though the cameras still rolled and the jokes still landed, the energy had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Meanwhile, Michael had retreated into the quiet of his own world, not out of shame or fear, but out of intentional recalibration, choosing instead to focus on the launch of his new directorial project, a gritty, intimate story set in Oakland about a former boxer mentoring kids to keep them off the streets, a passion project he'd been developing for years but now carried an extra weight, an urgency fueled by the recent confrontation and everything it represented. And as he poured himself into writing, casting, and location scouting, the media's hunger for another appearance from him only grew, especially after footage surfaced of a private phone call, leaked by an unnamed source, where an off-air Jimmy could be heard muttering, "Some people just can't take a joke," followed by a laugh that, stripped of a studio audience, sounded a lot more cynical than charming. And once that audio made its rounds on Twitter, the hashtag some people bite back trended for an entire weekend, with memes and fan-made artwork of Michael walking away from the Kimmel set like a modern gladiator who'd just refused to play for the crowd. And in response, Jimmy issued another, more formal apology, this one written by a team of PR experts and posted on his Instagram with a black and white photo of him and Michael from a previous, friendlier interview. But by then, the moment for easy reconciliation had long passed, and Michael didn't even acknowledge it. He simply kept working, holding quiet meetings with independent black creatives in LA, funding scholarships for film students, and prepping a short documentary about media framing that would premiere at Sundance later that year. But fate, as it often does in the entertainment world, wasn't done with either of them yet, because just a month later, the producers of an upcoming charity gala, broadcast live and featuring a conversation panel between influential figures in film and media, announced a lineup that included both Michael B. Jordan and Jimmy Kimmel, not as an intentional reunion, they claimed, but as part of broader scheduling that somehow overlooked the obvious tension. And once fans caught wind of the upcoming collision, buzz reignited like gasoline on flame, and the night of the event arrived with the kind of electricity that could bend air, as guests dressed to the nines filed into a candlelit ballroom in Beverly Hills while reporters camped outside like wolves sniffing for drama. And backstage, Jimmy paced with a script in hand, visibly rehearsing his lines, while Michael sat in silence with his team, sipping tea and scrolling through his phone with a practiced calm that masked the fact that this wasn't just another public appearance. It was a moment that could tip the narrative once and for all. When the panel finally began, with both men seated at opposite ends of the stage alongside a filmmaker and journalist, the tension was so thick that even the audience's applause sounded cautious, as if everyone present was afraid of what might happen next. And the first 20 minutes passed with careful professionalism, both Michael and Jimmy speaking in polished tones, answering broader questions about art and influence without ever directly acknowledging the elephant in the room, until the journalist on the panel, a respected name known for cutting through politeness like a scalpel, finally addressed it directly by saying, "There's been a lot of discussion about accountability in media. Michael, Jimmy, you were at the center of that recently. How has it changed your approach, if at all?" And the entire room seemed to inhale at once, the air snapping tight like a drum, and Jimmy glanced at Michael, his expression unreadable, then leaned into his mic and said, "I learned that sometimes, being clever isn't the same as being respectful." And though the answer was clearly coached, there was a sincerity in the way he looked across the stage that suggested he was trying, or at least trying to appear like he was trying. And Michael, for his part, waited a moment before replying, I think people forget we're not here to be clowned, we're here to talk about our work, our stories, and when that gets sidelined for cheap laughs, yeah, I'm gonna walk, and that was it, the moment that hit like a thunderclap, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was calm, unshaken, and brutally honest, and the audience erupted into applause, not just for the quote but for the clarity of it, for the refusal to play along with a system that too often reduces depth to caricature. After that, the panel continued, but the energy had shifted, and when the night ended and guests filtered out into the cool LA night, the conversation wasn't about Jimmy's apology or Michael's silence, it was about the quiet power of a man who had said his piece and walked away again, this time not in anger, but in complete control, and as the headlines rolled in the next morning, they didn't read like gossip, they read like a cultural checkpoint. Michael B. Jordan redefines grace under fire, late night learns a lesson, respect isn't optional, and though Jimmy continued to host, and Michael continued to create, neither of them were the same. One had been humbled, the other elevated, and the world, watching from behind their screens, was left with a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moves aren't made with fists or fury, but with a single, unshaken walk to the door.